We have Frank Mir and Richard Hunter on the show right now. How are you guys doing, man?
Great. Thanks for having us.
Good.
How are you?
Good. Phone booth fighting is taking off. You guys are getting a lot of buzz around the MMA scene and a lot of the fight scene. So a lot of people are talking about you guys, and you just had some really big guests on your show. Talk about that, man. How's it been getting these guests, and how do you feel about how the show's going?
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. First off, it has been real exciting, and Frank and I both, I think, have kind of been surprised at how quickly things have taken off. I know when I ran into you guys in LA this past week at UFC 199.
Yeah.
I just an example of what you're talking about. Justin Buchholz had come up to me, who I did not know. I knew of him, but we had never actually met. Of course, the guy that I guess is these days kind of the head coach at Team Alpha Male, but a longtime member of Team Alpha Male and the host of Stud Show Radio, his own podcast. And he came up to me and just told me he was really enjoying listening to the podcast and complimented me and, wanted me to pass his thoughts on to Frank, which I did. And that's just kind of an example of you realize all of a sudden that people are listening to what you're doing. Frank loves telling the story about how, when we first started doing this, we do just like we're joining you guys tonight. We're just sitting out here on Frank's back porch, and it's just the two of us talking. And this is a lot of what we do anyway, just sitting around out here, the two of us trying to solve the world's problems. And he was like, "Hey, we ought to record this, and share it." And so that's what we've been doing. But Frank, it's like you were telling me that up until fairly recently, you weren't really thinking of it in terms of anybody listening, and then I started showing you the numbers.
Yeah, not at all, actually. I think it was the first time I actually started. Not that I never took it seriously.
Yeah.
But the nervousness of actually making sure that it was, saying something of quality didn't occur until after, you let me know, like, hey, man, we had so many people download the show last week. I was like, man, people are listening? Oh, no.
Yeah.
But going to what you were saying earlier, I definitely think we both bring a lot to the table. But one thing that Richard does is, speaking of the guests, that's all him. His networking and ability of who he knows. Richard might have the most eclectic group of friends and acquaintances of any human being in the world.
Yeah.
From different spectrums. You name it. The guy has a friend in that world.
Yeah.
Well, it's a present company included. How does that make you feel? Huh?
Yeah, everything from fight world stuff to entertainment and music, stand-up comedy.
You're in that group of weirdos.
Adult film store. Definitely some interesting group of people you're friends with.
I think Josh and James, which you guys might have been alluding to, was this past week we did a show at Paul Stanley's house.
Yeah.
Paul Stanley from KISS.
That's
and
big time, man.
This actually was born out of Frank's social media connection, because Paul Stanley, who, by the way, was my childhood hero. This guy had a bigger influence on me than my own father did. And I just stumbled across it kind of one day. We were both looking over the Twitter timeline, and I noticed that Paul Stanley had been watching Frank's fight live. It was the Antonio Silva fight, and was basically kind of live tweeting it while it was going on. And direct tweeting to Frank, wow, that was unbelievable, And then I looked, and Frank was the only UFC fighter that Paul followed. Yeah. And he started posting these inspirational messages, good luck before the Todd Duffy fight, you're my favorite fighter and all this. And this was blowing my mind, And I told Frank, I said, man, you gotta DM him. You gotta DM. So he DMs him. They get a conversation going. And I was just hoping that, at some point maybe he would phone in to our show. And these guys hit it off so well that he just said, hey, you know what? Next time you're in LA, just come to my house and set up, and I'll co-host an episode with you. And that's what happened last week. It's available right now at phoneboothfighting.com.
Yeah.
It was, I think it's one of the best episodes we've ever done. And the cool thing was, as big of an influence as he was on me growing up, I think Frank, although Frank certainly had an awareness of KISS and who and what they were and everything, I think you really became a big-time Paul Stanley fan after that meeting.
I haven't said beforehand, one thing I told everybody, that Richard set the bar pretty high for Stanley, talking about who he was, the influence he had on his life. And that being said, when we left that house, I was blown away. Sitting down, the conversation with him, the intellect that he possessed, and just the life experience. I told him, I was like, man, the guy should have a robe on. I felt like we went to the top of the mountain and got to speak with a sage,
Yeah.
It was a very incredible experience. And by all standards, he exceeded all my expectations as a human being.
And we really did go to the top of the mountain. We went to the top of the Hollywood Hills.
Yeah.
That was like,
yeah, you're right.
We just kept going further and further and further up. And we're driving by like Jack Nicholson's house and Rod Stewart's house and all these crazy neighbors he has and everything. And that was quite an experience. And then the other weird thing was we ended up breaking a little rock music news on the podcast because if you haven't had a chance to hear it yet, one of the topics of conversation that came up was that Paul had recently done a guest spot on Ace Frehley's solo album, the original guitar player in Kiss.
Yeah.
And we asked the question, would he ever consider having Ace back in the band? And he talked about it at length. Well, kind of unbeknownst to us, I guess the classic rock world had been waiting for him to comment on that one way or another. So next thing we know, the last couple of days, all these music sites have been posting our podcast because it was on that podcast that he talked about it. So that was a cool thing. It was like we got to actually break a little news and get sourced for it that way. I mean, it's one thing to break some MMA news, but now we're branching out into the world of classic rock, I guess, from time to time.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Frank, the Ace Frehley, he's a huge rock star, man. How does it feel to have a big rock star like that, follow you and Paul Stanley and be a big fan of yours?
It's always surprising just because I don't think that really in the world of MMA and the UFC specifically, the fighters, we haven't really been bred, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Conditioned maybe
to feel like we're superstars. If you think about it, I mean, there's a few, obviously a Conor McGregor type or a Brock Lesnar, but for the most part, you see us before fights walking in the group of the audience. You don't have the same atmosphere as you have with some of the other sports where the athletes are segregated away from fans, and you see the guy walk in real quick with his entourage of bodyguards. So that being the case, it kind of keeps us humble, and that mindset carries over to when we do see somebody of a Paul Stanley type of stature or status. I would never think that when I was direct messaging, I never would have expected a reply back. And every time that happens, everything from Charles Barkley one time singled me out in a crowd to come over and say hi.
Wow.
Situations like that, when you have somebody of that type of recognizable influence in our culture, for them to even know who you are, let alone actually be a fan of yours, is something I'm not used to yet. And still, every time, every situation, I'm taken back.
That's awesome.
Have you run into anybody that's just like kind of gave you left you starstruck when you met them, or maybe they recognized you?
Charles Barkley was probably a situation was kind of funny. We're sitting at fights, my wife and I, and all of a sudden Charles Barkley is looking in our way, and I'm like, man, that is a huge human being, and he's pointing, he's trying to catch my attention. And I'm still kind of in denial at this point because I'm looking over my shoulder, I'm like, I wonder who he knows over here that he's trying to get a hold of. And then he shakes his head and he does the finger again. No, you. So then I stand up and I'm doing the me, trying to get my attention.
Right.
Walked over, gave me a hug, it made me feel extremely small. And then started talking at lengths about different fights that I had and his admiration for them, and it just blew my mind. Like I said. 30 seconds before that, if you'd have said, hey, do you think this guy knows you exist? I'd been like, no. Yeah. And then for not only for that to be wrong, but then to actually be a fan, I'd received, Tim Duncan one time reached out to us, to me. That was, mind-boggling to read an email from him, as far as being a fan. Yeah, so just different situations. I mean, for people to actually be in that echelons of stardom to recognize you, each time I'm kind of taken back a little bit, and I've had quite a few experiences over a 15-year career.
Yeah,
I think that day is also going to come when I introduce Frank to Ron Jeremy. I haven't done that yet, but I think when it comes to heroes, Ron might be on a short list for Frank.
A lot of time my teenage years.
Frank, you were a bouncer at Spearman too, right, for a while? Weren't you head of the security there for quite some time too?
Yeah, I started there in 2001, and I
that's
worked
crazy.
until 2008.
I'm a big fan of your podcast, obviously. And one of my favorite segments is a segment that actually Frank, your wife, kind of came up with, is talking to your your opponents and kind of do like a timeline of what's going on, at that time. Is there any way that Brock Lesnar will be on your segment?
I'd be okay with it on my end.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think that, I'm able to step outside myself, and at that point, I'm being, bringing information to the fans,
right.
And so I think it's something that people would enjoy. He's not really the most open guy, from what I've gathered from his, social media,
right?
And so, I think on his part, it'd probably be a hard situation to make if through my, almost 20-something odd fights I had in the UFC.
Yeah, well, we figured it out because there's a couple of rematches in there. So I think it's like 25. Yeah. It's a little more than 24 people we have to track down.
More than 24 guys.
Yeah.
If you told me who would probably be the least likely to appear, it'd probably be Brock. But that's just the way it is.
Well, that's okay, because I have a plan for that. So what I'm thinking is going to happen is we will. I appreciate the kind words about the segment. Mrs. Mir deserves a lot of credit there for that brainchild. And the first one with Tim Sylvia, which we just did like 2 weeks ago.
I love that episode.
Awesome. Did you get a chance to hear it? Thank you.
Yeah.
It was cool because there's so many stories behind the fight that everybody saw the fight, but they don't know what was going on in individual dressing rooms. Right. And it was interesting to hear these guys compare notes too. That's what you were thinking. Well, here's what I was thinking. Here's what I was being told, and the fights that almost happened, the rematch that almost happened but didn't, and why, and all that sort of thing. So my thought is that as we keep doing these installments, that we get a good collection of opponents going. You're right, Brock is probably going to be one of the most reluctant ones, but what we do is I anticipate, guys, that by that point there will be such a clamoring for it that we can get like a social media campaign when he's like the only one left to collect. He's like the Boba Fett action figure. Yeah. He was the hardest one to get, and we start hashtagging this thing. We just start hounding him until he joins the show. I think it's either that or, and this is the more complicated scenario, we have to don fatigues and go up to Minnesota and like jump out of the brush and engage in some sort of firefight. He might
think you're a deer, man. I don't know. He might think you're a deer and take a shot at you. So
and the thing, too, to give credit to my wife about that, I think the reason it really came from the fact of one aspect of our sport that fascinated her when she first, we first got together. She's one of, 4 girls. So fighting was something. When we first met, she thought I did aerobics kickboxing. When I tried to explain to her what the UFC was, she had no clue.
Wow.
So then throughout us being together, she would see times where after fights, times I was victorious, times I was not victorious, hanging out with opponents, having a drink, hanging out, and completely a different situation. And I think that really struck a chord with her when trying to explain to people that as a fighter, I'm not naturally a violent person per se, where I don't answer a thing. I'm not an angry guy. I'm not walking around just, waiting for somebody to cut me off in traffic so I have an excuse to, to pull them out of a car.
Yeah.
She knows that I love martial arts, and she's like, wow, look, this group of guys who fight for the sake of loving that they like to fight. Just like a football player loves to play football, there's not an angst of anger towards your enemy. I mean, obviously there's a very competitive nature where you want to win, but when the game or the fight or the match or whatever you want to call it is over with, so is all the emotions. It's done. And I think that was by her having it to where she's like, well, you'll have guys that come on, obviously you've won, guys you've lost, and seeing that the two of you can be online together on the phone or, hopefully sometimes in person and stay cordial and laugh. And I think the first time she saw that really struck with her was it was some fights that we were at. I think Phil was fighting Baroni, and we were all friends. And after the fights, we all went to a bar, and Tim was there, Sylvia. Mm-hmm. And he's not a drinker, but for whatever reason, he jumped over the bar and decided to be the bartender. Here he's serving alcohol, I'm drinking, he's laughing, we're making jokes. He has a scar on his arm from the surgery, and we're all okay with each other. There wasn't an uncomfortable sensation. Years later, I remember we had a Super Bowl party, we hung out, and Brandon Vera was in town, somebody I had lost to. Yeah. And we sat there, we were talking to each other on the phone. He had some questions about firearms and guns and places to go in Vegas. And I was like, hey, I'm heading down to such and such place to watch the fights if you and your wife want to come by. And we sat down, had drinks, and hung out and watched the fights. And, shoulder to shoulder to somebody that, that I had competed against and not came out on the winning end.
Right.
And when she sees that, I think that's what she really wants to convey with that show. It's not only giving details and background to fights that, people can see more details and experiences that maybe were missed out in just the viewing of the fight itself or whatever the UFC maybe used in the build-up. But, seeing that we're cordial human beings, that at the end of the day, we fight because we like to fight. You say go, we'll go. But when it's off, it's over with.
Right. And talk about Brock, because it seems like there's still some bad blood between you and Brock, and maybe your thoughts on his return at 200. Are you surprised by it, and do you think that the WWE has more to lose than to gain?
What was the last part? Who has more to lose or gain?
Whether the WWE has more to lose or gain.
Yeah, I think I think it's. I have mixed feelings about it, because I remember about 2 years ago there was clamoring of him coming back to re-sign, and it seemed like at that time it was a way of him leveraging in to get more. He went and signed a contract back with McMahon, and so at that point I was like, oh man, you kind of used us. Here you had the fans all excited you were coming back, you were going, but it was kind of a ploy to play. He basically had two bidders in the group, and business-wise, I get it. He helped line his pockets more by doing that. It definitely got him a lot more attention, and even so now, 4 weeks ago, when he announced, or however long, 2 weeks ago now, when he announced that he was going to come back, obviously he's back on the map. Before that, his pro wrestling, I don't know if it's been as significant as of a draw as it is when he comes back to the fight world. The electricity that is enacted by the fans and the media, I think everybody, that became the talk of that UFC when his promo was shown. And so I'm a little leery. I'm one of those, hey, fool me once, I'm like, oh man, don't fool me twice. Are you really coming back to fight, or are you just? He has a pro wrestling event scheduled for August, and so in my mind I'm like, is this just a publicity plant? Are you going to get injured a couple days before the fight? Or, are you really going to show up? If he shows up, it brings people to the sport. That helps everybody else out. I'm for it. If it's not, if it's just a publicity thing, I'll be upset about that.
Yeah.
Are you hoping he sticks around until you finally come back?
Yeah, obviously, I think that would be a huge fight. We're 1-1 against each other, and Brock brings and sells tickets. Anybody who walks in the octagon with him, it's going to help out their career. He right now, with him stepping back into the UFC, he is the most popular heavyweight in the UFC,
right?
Bar none.
Yeah. And your thoughts, Richard, on the whole Brock situation?
Yeah, it's, first of all, I think that the WWE is probably getting something in return. There's a theory out there that there may be a trade for Ronda Rousey at next year's WrestleMania. That makes a lot of sense. There's talk that Paige Van Zandt might be involved in SummerSlam, which I think is next month. So those kind of things make a lot of sense, not only because Ronda's such a wrestling fan, but that way the WWE gets – because there's not really anything for them to gain in Brock Lesnar just going to the UFC and appearing for one night and one night only. I mean, he's risking injury. If it goes well, I guess he looks good, but if he gets beaten – then he sort of comes back to WWE, maybe with a little luster off of his shine for those who suspend disbelief and allow themselves to buy into the storyline or whatever. So I think that the WWE is probably getting something in return out of this, but I think it's smart, and it's probably one of the few ways that the WWE and the UFC could partner for mutual benefit, especially if there's a player to be named later in the deal.
It does scare me a little bit, just because in the past the UFC's made a pretty, I felt, and maybe I'm wrong, I thought they wanted to make a real strong distinction between what we do and what pro wrestling is.
Right.
Yeah.
And now it seems like they're willing to blur those lines.
Yeah.
They're making exceptions already. He didn't have to be 4 months under USADA's testing pool.
That's a problem. Yeah, and that then Mark Hunt himself is not happy about that.
No,
he said he's taking great exception to the fact that they're giving him the exemption where he would normally be tested 4 months prior to, like if a fighter were to debut in the UFC or to come out of retirement. And you actually, Frank, you just brought up a great point that I had not really considered. If you think back to when Kurt Angle was talking about possibly being interested in MMA a number of years ago, Dana White had told him that he had to pick one or the other, that he wasn't going to let him do pro wrestling and MMA at the same time. And Kurt Angle is an Olympic gold medalist wrestler, so he's at least got the same legitimate pedigree that Brock has. But I think maybe it's a legacy, maybe it's kind of grandfathered in since Brock has been in the UFC before and been a legitimate champion. Maybe that's the thought.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it definitely blurs the lines.
Yeah.
I think, it doesn't happen a lot, but I'll have people ask me that question whenever I'm doing meet and greets with new fans. And, you'll always have that person that comes up and is like, is it really real?
Oh, yeah.
And now, that's one thing. It's like, oh, man, don't tell me this is going to get confusing. We start doing exchanges and, and all of a sudden people see Paige Van Zandt or Ronda Rousey at a pro wrestling event and competing as pro wrestlers and then coming over and competing as fighters. It's, the whole worked match aspect of it, then already we have such an issue with decisions and whatnot in our sport. I don't want it to degrade us anymore. I guess I'm just being very critical and protective over something I've been a part of for a long time.
Right.
I don't want to call into question our authenticity.
Sometimes it's fun to play dumb wrestling guy, though. I know when CM Punk announced that he was coming over to the UFC, I enjoyed talking to people on Media Row and saying, man, I don't know. I just saw this guy fight The Undertaker like a month ago. He had trouble with him, and he's like 60 years old. I don't know how this is going to go.
Wow.
Yeah.
The one thing that people aren't talking about is the whole sponsorship, because Brock Lesnar has a deal with the WWE where he's allowed to bring his sponsor like Jimmy Jacks to the WWE ring, and now that the UFC is exclusive with Reebok, and I think the only sponsor that let in is Monster. So I don't know if Brock was able to make a deal with the UFC to bring in that Jimmy Jacks, and if he is able to bring Jimmy Jacks into the octagon, it's going to create a lot of problems with the fighters itself, because people want also sponsors.
Money talks.
That's a great question though. I mean, will we see Brock Lesnar in a Reebok uniform, or will he be pimping Jimmy John sandwiches or whatever? I guess we won't know until he walks to the cage, or maybe you can check Ariel Helwani's Twitter feed a couple hours before 200, and we'll find out that way.
But that's something in our culture that always surprises me when people sit there and use the word fair, or to make things on an even playing field. And in business, it's not. When somebody provides you greater income, they're given greater flexibility of bending the rules. I mean, we see it on a kid's level. You go to a high school game of football. I guarantee the kid that runs 100 yards a game and scoring 3 or 4 touchdowns, he could be late to practice and probably not going to get benched. So at a very early age, I think we already are seeing that people who perform and provide are afforded exceptions to the rules. And when people sit there and go, wait a minute, you said this, I'm like, yeah, that's for everybody else, but this guy's going to, obviously 4 weeks before UFC 200 already has Daniel Cormier and John Jones on it. I don't think the UFC wants to come out and have poor ticket sales. And so that being my
got a cameo here from Cage Mirror there. Yeah.
That being the situation, I don't think they want it to where UFC 200 does less ticket sales than UFC 100.
Yeah.
No, they have a business. I don't think that looks good when you go on your quarterly report type situation. And go, well, everybody's looking. Well, what did they do on pay-per-view buys? And then, whenever you're the top of the food chain, everybody's really quick to want to ring the bell. They're on their way down. It's the demise of the UFC, and to squash those rumors, they went and grabbed Brock Lesnar, who obviously is a big-time ticket draw. And that's why he's afforded flexibility. Already you've seen, the guy already doesn't have to pass the same drug tests that everybody else was being subjected to.
Yeah.
And so that being the case, him not having to abide by the same rules as far as through sponsorships, I would be surprised if he did have to follow the rules.
Yeah. Right. Do you welcome the notoriety of being tied to a guy like that so much? Because when Brock comes up, you come up pretty much every time.
We do seem to... we can't escape each other.
Yeah.
The ex-girlfriend can't get away, man.
Yeah, and I think also, too, because our personality is very polarizing as far as we're pretty much opposite as individuals.
Yeah. And I heard about the Reebok uniform. I heard he might come back in the Reebok uniform, but it will be under a Canadian symbol, a Canadian flag type of Reebok shirt, because I guess he was born in Canada or he's from Canada.
Well, he has a farm in Canada.
Yeah, he's a farm in Canada, so he might represent Canada when he comes in using his Reebok.
Even being a U.S. citizen, huh?
Yeah, that's what I've read.
All I know about Brock in Canada is that when he had his diverticulitis, he was going on and on about how horrible Canadian healthcare was, and
they basically shit on their whole healthcare system.
Yeah, and I was just in my mind, I was thinking, he doesn't understand the concept of single payer, because it was right when healthcare reform was happening here, and he was using that as a jumping off point to criticize the idea, and I was like, Oh gosh, it's not like that. It's much more like an English model, and it just I don't even know what he was what he was plugging at the moment, because it was frustrating to me. I think I talked to Chael about that one time. I was like, man, if you ever just get him alone, can you just explain to him the difference in the Canadian healthcare system and the British?
I think somebody might be able to explain it to him. He could speak in his terms.
Yeah.
And Chael is the guy is a sharp guy. He's very intelligent, very educated individual. So if anybody. And he can speak the pro wrestling terminology. Maybe he can help him out.
That's right. Or maybe we'll talk about that when he appears on our show. For the installment of Frank Mir on the record. Yeah.
That'll chase him.
Are you going to break it?
Don't make the guy change.
Do you have plans for him to come on the show soon?
Well, we're working. Are you talking about Brock or Chael?
Chael's a regular.
Chael's been on a couple of times, and I direct everybody to phoneboothfighting.com if you want to hear those archived episodes. Yeah. We're also on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Chael's been on a couple of times, and I don't have to tell you what a great guest he is. Yeah, he's a guy that we'd like to consider just kind of a recurring guest, I think is a safe way to describe Chael.
Now, one last thing about Brock, and then we can move on from it. I think the WWE is losing a lot, because I think the following weekend is SummerSlam, and so if Brock gets knocked out by Mark Hunt, which is a great possibility, I don't think he'll be able to compete at SummerSlam. I think the commission steps in and doesn't allow Brock to compete in pro wrestling for 90 days.
Is pro wrestling held under the same guidelines? It's not.
Well, I know the WWE has like a wellness policy. Well, if someone suffers a concussion, they can't compete for 90 days. So.
Yeah, I think
it's the 90-day thing, just like it is in the UFC. If I get a 180-day or whatever suspension, it's dependent upon a MRI and examination by a physician. Yeah. So you get a concussion on Saturday, you very well could just walk into a facility on Monday, get an MRI. You have a physician sign off that you're okay, that there is no damage as far as you're not bleeding, no bleeds on the brain, and you can be healthy and compete that weekend.
Can you hear those sirens?
What's happening? Yeah.
Frank lives in a real rough neighborhood.
Drive-bys,
I live some old person's problem.
Yeah.
Now, Richard, you're more of on the entertainment side. You do stand-up comedy on the radio all the time. Frank is coming from fighting. It's getting louder. Huh?
What's that?
No,
I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, the sirens are getting louder.
Yeah.
So, Richard, you come from the entertainment side, and then Frank, you come from fighting. When you have guests on, Richard, are you more gravitated towards learning more about the fighters that come on, as opposed to Frank, maybe with the entertainers that come on that are outside of fighting?
Well, you know what? I think that's one of the things that makes our partnership work really well together. Yeah. First of all, I think just on a friendship level, one of the things that we have always really connected on is a mutual intellectual curiosity about really just kind of anything. Yeah. It's funny with Frank, because we met through mutual friends, and Dan Hardy was the first guy that told me. He asked me if I'd ever really talked to Frank or hung out with Frank or whatever. This is years ago, and I was like, no, really. He goes, if you guys would be friends. He's like, if you two could just hang out, have conversations, So it was interesting, because before we even really met or did this podcast or anything, I had several people, Dan and several other people, tell me that, And so I really saw it once we started doing the podcast and then booking the guests, because you're right. I mean, I come traditionally from a radio background, and that involves preparation when you have guests on and things like that. But listen, Frank is into it, and that's actually become part of the fun to me in doing this. And it's not just, I mean, maybe I knew, maybe I had a few more Paul Stanley posters on my wall than Frank did as a kid, but it's also, just as likely that it might be something that Frank is particularly interested in, that I'm learning about as well. I think when it comes to the fights, I mean, we both know quite a bit about that. I mean, him obviously from the first person part of it, but me from covering it for so many years. But outside of that, apart from that, and not even only with guests, but just issues, current events and political issues and things like that. I think we just both have a real mutual intellectual curiosity towards those things, and so it ends up just sort of happening organically. We end up talking about those things. Paul Stanley is a good example. I mean, when he was coming on, Frank's reading his book, his autobiography. Mm-hmm. He's doing online research. We knew for a couple of weeks before the interview that we were going to be doing it. And, Frank's coming to me going, hey, did you know he did this? I just read about this. I just found out about that. Did you know about that? So we really, there's not much orchestration to it. It's just kind of like something is happening on the show. We're both excited to be a part of it, to have a chance to speak to somebody. And it really turns into much more of a cyclical conversation, between the group of us.
Yeah. Right. Now the fight news that came out from 199 is McGregor versus Diaz Part 2. Do you think the UFC is kind of dropping the ball by letting McGregor compete against Diaz again and not defending his 145-pound title?
What do you think?
I think that they're kind of in a bad situation with the fact being that I think one person I think that it would be McGregor's kryptonite, especially after watching the Diaz fight and things I had seen in his other fights. I think Frankie Edgar is a horrible fight for Conor.
I agree.
I think his speed, his mobility, his takedown, ground and pound on the ground, his ability to do submissions, it is too much. He's too well-rounded and too much more of a complete martial artist than Conor is. Conor, you've seen him on the ground, even in his defense, even in the fight against Mendez. When people sit there and go, well, he's on the ground, I'm like, but he didn't do anything. He just kind of tied up a guy, and the guy on top kind of gassed. Not really that because he was escaping or moving around or really showing any kind of technique or ability besides kind of talking garbage from the bottom. I seen a guy that, really didn't know what he was doing there. So I think he's extremely talented as a striker, his mobility, his athletic ability, his timing. But as far as the complete game of MMA, I think if you had to sit there and put all the champions right now in all our weight classes and rank them as far as who's a complete martial artist, I think he ranks on the lower end of that spectrum. So I think that having him, avoid Frankie Edgar and maybe hopefully throw Frankie Edgar against Jose Aldo, and Aldo can bounce back and maybe put a dent in him and avoid that matchup, I think is beneficial. Plus going out there again with the Nate, I think that, they still kind of have the built-in excuse that it's a weight class up. Yeah. So if he does come up short,
two weight classes up, if you think about it, from featherweight champ to welterweight.
Right. Well, and I think they also do that realistically. I don't think they want to have Nate fight at 155 because that's where Nate recently has been.
Yeah.
And so I think it sounds better to say a guy moved. It was funny. Right. I heard fans saying that he moved up 2 weight classes. I'm like, guys, he fought a 55 pounder that on 9 days' notice couldn't make 55.
Yeah.
I know that Nate has fought at welterweight, but his fight before that he was at 155. So no, he fought a guy.
Fighter,
He fought a guy who was 1 weight class above him, who just on 9 days' notice, being on a yacht drinking tequila, couldn't make the weight class in time. Yeah. And so the same thing's going to go again. I think that Nate's style is just very hard for him to fight. I think that he doesn't have a size advantage that he typically has when he's fighting 45. I think that his striking takes a lot of energy. It's a lot of speed, a lot of movement. He's moving his body around a lot, in and out. And that's fatiguing. Nate Diaz's style, because of his motion and his movement, he can keep that grinding pace up where he's just constantly throwing hands at you and moving around. And the minute, he hurt him with stand-up last time. Nate was able to catch him and forced, it wasn't like he got a double on McGregor and you can say, well, we got to improve your wrestling. Last time I remember watching the fight, McGregor got rocked in the boxing range of fighting early in the fight by a guy who only had 9 days to prepare for it. And then he took a shot on him. He decided to make it a ground fight because in his mind, I think he did the math going, do I want to get knocked out devastatingly or do I want to get submitted? A lot of guys feel like by getting submitted, it's less demeaning. It's, not as, bad. I got tapped out. I have a different outlook on it that, one thing is to have someone else stop you and the referee come to protect you.
I guess it depends on who's tapping you out.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, too, to me, it's like, well, you cried uncle. I've always said that before. It's like at the end of the day, you were tapping. You didn't go out like Holly, where she just went out on her shield and said, well, I'm going to go to sleep. Even if she didn't consciously make that decision, she fought until she couldn't fight no longer and lost consciousness. Whereas McGregor on the ground, you saw a guy who was very quick to tap.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear, it wasn't like it was a pain thing. It wasn't like his arm was in a submission, like, well, I didn't want to get my arm broken. I would relate to that. But as a person who studies jiu-jitsu, if you're getting choked, you fight until the very bitter end, and if you go out, they wake you up afterwards.
Yeah. Tapping
to it means that you're uncomfortable and it hurt and you want out. And that was a conscious decision you had to make. You lifted up your hand and started tapping to sit there and go, let me go.
Right.
That doesn't bode well for me as a warrior spirit.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, do you see this matchup being a worse beating by Nate, considering it has a full training camp, ahead of him?
Say it again?
Do you think this fight is going to be more one-sided as far as Nate winning the fight, considering that Nate Diaz has a full training camp?
Yeah, I think that I think there's more advantages for Nate going into this. I mean, obviously it's a fight, 4-ounce gloves, anybody clips anybody. Right. I'm not surprised with outcomes. It's not the same as watching a football matchup or a basketball where you kind of know at a certain point if there's a big difference, there's not really going to be that quick one shot. Well, the whole game's won off of that one movement. Typically in other sports, you have to beat somebody over a period of time. In our sport, you only have to beat them for half a second, and then you win the whole fight.
Right.
And so I think going into that fight, there was a lot of hype going behind McGregor. That I know Nate's mentally strong, but he had to have been thinking about it. I mean, there was a guy who just knocked out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds.
Yeah.
How hard does this guy hit? How quick is this guy? How is this guy? You have a hard time not listening to the hype going around somebody, and there was a lot of hype going around McGregor. That the guy was Superman. But now Nate has had months to sit there and go, well, I felt what the guy felt like. I felt his power. I know how hard he hits. I know how fast he is. And, how much more can McGregor improve his punching power?
Yeah.
That's about it. He wasn't able to crack him hard enough to dissuade Nate from marching forward. Nate came forward even after getting hit with punches. I mean, things cut him, but he kept coming forward enough to where he put hands on McGregor. And McGregor felt Nate Diaz's power, and it made him shoot on him. And that was a guy with very short notice jumped in there.
Yeah.
Right.
On today's show, on today's Errol Hawani show, he had Fedor Emelianenko on there, who said that he's very close to signing with the UFC at some point after his next coming fight that's going to be showcased on Fight Pass.
I started to say, well, he's gotten as far as Fight Pass. I guess he's getting closer.
Might as well. They're promoting him like he's a part of the UFC because they're promoting a lot of Fedor on Fight Pass, at least on their YouTube channel. What'd you think about that, that news that that's where he wants to go, his next fight? That's where he's kind of aiming for as long as they could work out a deal.
Well, I mean, he's been, MMA's most sought-after free agent for how many? I mean, he's really kind of made the latter portion of his career off of that, I think, and probably to his benefit. He reminds me, all things, being hindsight being 2020. Tell me if this is an analogy you guys agree with, but I sort of think of him a little bit like I thought of Mike Tyson in his latter years. Now, I don't mean the bitter end. I don't mean, when he just shouldn't have been fighting anymore. But if you remember, after, the seemingly invincible Mike Tyson was beaten by Buster Douglas and then, a pair of times by Evander Holyfield, he kind of went on that international tour, and he would fight the international Danish champion of something or another. And, he was winning in devastating fashion, and it's not that it wasn't impressive, but he was able to – it was almost like by staying out of the big fights, he was able to keep his mystique bigger, right?
Yeah,
so I mean, if we really think about the last time that we've seen Fedor Emelianenko on a big stage – I mean, we've never seen him on the biggest stage, meaning the UFC, but, Pride to Strike Force and Affliction and that sort of thing. Our last memories of seeing him on that sizable stage, the Strike Force stage, was being defeated by Bigfoot Silva, being defeated by Dan Henderson. So he goes away for a little bit, and I think the time has actually done the rehabilitation of his legend some good, because I think there's actually more anticipation seeing him possibly come to the UFC now than there would have been in the immediate aftermath of him being beaten by Bigfoot and Dan Henderson.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. You know what? And I'm just saying that because you're here, Frank, but I've always said the two guys that I want to see Fedor fight is one, Brock, and two, you. So is a fight as far as like when you return back to the UFC, and let's say Fedor signs with the UFC, is that a fight that you're looking for?
Oh, absolutely. I think that I've one thing that I can take into to my grave is that I've always fought a who's who of the mixed martial arts world. I mean,
I'll mention that at your funeral.
My credentials as far as the quality of opponents that I've had, has been at the highest.
Right.
I've pretty much faced all the top guys at one point or another. A lot of champions and former champions, and so Fedor, for such a long time during the, my career was always touted as the #1 heavyweight in the world. We couldn't get access to him because he was over there in Pride. Mm-hmm. And then when he did come over and fought in Strikeforce, he looked very mortal. Things looked a little bit differently when he started facing some of the guys here, and fighting inside of a cage, I think, kind of affected his style drastically. Right. I think that it made it hard. And then that's when he dropped down to where physically he seems much more appropriate at 205. Yeah. But he fought Dan Henderson. But that really, it's kind of hard to take a knock on somebody for fighting Dan and getting caught by him. I mean, Henderson, we just seen how hard he hits. He's one of those guys that, he could be 65 years old, and if he gets out of his car and you're angry at him, be careful. I mean, that guy might put your head. Run away. I wouldn't want to get hit by the guy. The guy can hit hard, and he's a very powerful individual. So, that as far as a reason why he's not doing well, it's like, well, he faced top guys. I always kind of wondered, and now it draws into conclusion or into question how good Fedor really was, because you wondered, like, well, what was the level of quality opponents did he always face? Mm-hmm. If you look at the champion now, in Stipe's faced a lot of tough guys to work his way to the title fight. If you look at everybody in the top 10 of the UFC, everybody fights everybody. That's why you really don't have any really division of a clear-cut runner. Everybody has knockouts on their record both ways on receiving ends. I mean, the champion now was knocked out by Stefan Struve at one point. When you're grinding against the best guys in the world, it's hard to be a clear-cut runner. I mean, and when you do have them, you have a person like a Demetrius Johnson or a John Jones who just seems just to easily walk through everybody. Then it just makes it that much more impressive, because the argument that Fedor, you could have made in the past was like, well, he's doing that, but there, you had Pride, you had the UFC, there was a division of the talent. Not all the best guys were under one body. Now, we have weight classes where, I would sit there and go, well, who could Demetrius Johnson face? It's not in the UFC. I mean, the guy's now on a 9-fight win streak. He's faced the best of the best. Yeah. Dominic Cruz, the guy has one loss on his resume back in WEC. Mm-hmm. Who hasn't he faced, Right. We go through that. I mean, Frankie Edgar, who hasn't he faced, Yeah. So when you sit there and go, these guys are great fighters, it's hard to sit there and go, well, but there's this one guy overseas, we really don't have that situation. And that kind of happened during the Fedor thing. I think that's why the fans always wanted to see him be a part of the UFC, so that way it could quench any, doubts in his abilities. And me too. I've met the guy. I'm a fan. I think that he would do extremely well. His ability to stay calm and collective under fire is very impressive. His submission abilities are super sharp. Mm-hmm. His sambo background, and then the guy hits like a truck. More than one guy. I remember watching the fight at Affliction, and it looked like Andre was going to pull off the upset, and he came out there very dominant the first couple of exchanges. Looked good, kicked him, threw him against the post of the corner, and one flying knee later, he was being told that he didn't. It wasn't his night.
Yeah. That grappling aspect between you guys would be awesome. If you guys ever get on the ground, it'd be pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, he's a very slick submission artist, on top of a very powerful puncher.
Frank also has a great Christmas sweater that he wears around the holidays. A lot of people haven't seen, but I'm thinking if the Fedor fight ever got made, the two of you in your matching sweaters at the press conference would turn some heads.
Now, do you guys spend a lot of time outside of the podcast? Are you guys go out to bars? You guys spend time with each other?
BFFs?
Are you guys BFFs on the outside?
Yes, in kind of an increasingly ridiculous way. Perhaps the most the most sexually ambiguous thing we've done to date, in addition to sitting up late night in hotel rooms and having late night talks and, occasionally picking up the phone and calling boys and giggling and hanging up on them when they answer. We just, this past Saturday night, we went to see Boys to Men.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
Whose idea was this? Whose idea was this?
Oh,
Wife's
wow.
birthday. She wanted to go see them, so we all went as couples.
Okay.
It wasn't like it was just me and Rich together.
Okay. Were you guys drunk or sober?
I never drink, so
okay.
I'm totally sober. It was a great show. I really enjoyed it. No,
Yeah.
it was Frank's wife's birthday, and so it was double date night. But no, we had a really good time, and we do. I mean, it's in fact we'll mention this on your show. We haven't even unveiled this on our podcast, Phone Booth Fighting, yet. But you know, Frank, this was Frank's idea. We went to 2 episodes a week just last week, right? So we have new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. We had been once a week, and then a couple of weeks ago we decided to up it to 2 days a week. Frank had this idea. He was like, man, he goes, you know, I call you and talk about stuff all the time anyway. He's like, you know, we have these phone conversations that aren't even part of the podcast where we're on the phone for long periods of time. He said, why don't we start recording the calls and we'll just make them like mini episodes throughout the week, like little, you know, 20-minute phone conversation snippets.
That's
so we're
awesome.
gonna start doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but to answer your question, yes. I mean, there's a lot of it's kind of amazing because as much content I think as we create during the week that we upload, there's actually a large amount. I mean,
Absolutely.
we probably would have gotten dirty looks from our significant others Saturday night if we would have broken out the portable recorder and started taping a podcast in the middle of the birthday dinner. But we could have easily done that. Yeah.
Now, speaking of music, I know you're good friends with Vinnie Paul, and both Josh and I are huge Pantera fans.
Oh yeah.
Is there going to be an episode with maybe him on the show, maybe at some point?
Interesting that you guys are intuitive tonight. I'll go ahead and give you something else that we haven't explained publicly yet, but or revealed publicly.
Feed us more.
Yeah. Here's an exclusive for you guys. So I saw Vinnie Paul last Sunday, with the day we came back from L.A. His band Hell Yeah was playing over at SLS Casino here in Vegas. And, of course, Vinny lives in Vegas now, and Vinny and I knew each other from way back in the Pantera days because, you know, I'm from Dallas, which is, of course, Pantera's hometown. And so I was talking to him, and he gave me some passes to the show and went out and saw the show. But I was telling him about the fact that we were going to Paul Stanley's house, and, you know, we'd done these. I'm presenting them as home invasion episodes where we, you know, show up at somebody's house and do a show. So Vinny is known for throwing some legendary pool parties. And we kicked around the idea. We kicked around. What's that?
Oh, Frank's face is epic.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm already imagining what that's going to be like.
Yeah. So Vinny and I think there is going to be a phone booth fighting appearance at a Vinny Paul pool party at some point in the not too distant future.
Dude, hook us up, man. Invite
All right.
us.
Okay. All right. We may
man.
we may have to do that. He's a great dude. I mean, I've known him for so many years. Him and the late great Dimebag Darrell both were just the greatest guys. You know, they never. It wasn't until Darrell passed away that Vinny moved to Las Vegas. I mean, those guys, no matter how big and world famous they got, never left Arlington, Texas, and. Because of that, I mean, just growing up, they were around, you know, my whole life. I'd see them out places, and the only thing that changed is, you know, the size of venue that they played, but they always stayed the same cool guys, and Vinny's still that guy.
Yeah, and both Vinny and Dimebag are huge Kiss fans as well. Those guys, they worship Kiss.
Oh yeah. I in fact at Dimebag's house, which is still there in Arlington, and it really has remained largely untouched since he passed away. His girlfriend that was really like his wife, Rita, has sort of continued to care for the place. And that's where the home studio was, where Pantera recorded and things like that. So I took a friend of mine, Hal Sparks, that Frank met, cool. Also a big fan. Yeah, he and I were doing some stand-up dates together in Dallas, and so he was a big fan. So I took him over to the house. And so he could see the house and everything. And like I said, the house really has been left largely untouched since Dimebag passed away. And there are pictures on the wall that Ace Frehley drew of himself, like just drawing on the bathroom wall. It's like a frat house over there. You can draw on the wall if you want to or whatever, sign your name. And there's actually these little original, artistic drawings from Ace Frehley. It was pretty cool to see.
That's awesome, man.
Hey, so since you guys started this podcast right now, like, and Frank, in your time off from fighting, what does this podcast mean to you in terms of putting your focus in, making this podcast successful? And same for you, Richard, been in this endeavor with Frank.
Basically, I'm a competitive person. I like to be good at things. Yeah. I have a knack for I like broadcasting, and I think the reason why I enjoy that is because anytime I can share information, any knowledge that I might possess on the subject of martial arts, I've always enjoyed doing so. Yeah. I've always really reaped a lot of pride from the fact of when an individual came up to me and been like, "Hey, man, I've always been a fan, but I could never get my girl or my aunt or grandmother or somebody else. My buddy would not really into the sport. They're a boxing fan or whatever the case may be. But after they listened to you, they became a fan. They're interested. They actually now realize what's going on. They just thought it was just two guys, half naked, rolling around on the ground together. They had no, And so I've always taken a pleasure in being able to bring people and enlighten guys. And I think when I speak to people in general, I'm not really talking to a hardcore fans, because really what am I going to say that they probably already don't know? Yeah. But if I can break it down in simple terms to people that are new to the sport, then I take great pleasure in that. And so that's really what the podcast with me and Richard coming together was. That so many times we've had conversations and break things down and talk, and not even just in the realm of martial arts. We talk about life itself. I'll talk about being a parent, or being a husband. Comes up a lot. Different approaches. On our show, different topics might arise that definitely fall outside the spectrum of the MMA world. And we just have discussions, and I like it because it, to me, talking invokes, dialogue invokes conversation in that way, to where ideas are exchanged. And I've had it to people, especially now with social media, there might be something that I say or have an opinion on, and somebody can go ahead and write a contrary thought, or well, hey, what about this angle? What about this? And I can look at it and go, wow, no, I never thought of it that way. Or maybe I'll approach it this way from now on. And that whole, almost, a bunch of guys in a bar with a beer, just discussing, everything from martial arts, sports, life itself, I enjoy. And so basically the podcast is an outlet for me to, open up my range to where it's not just the few friends that I have hanging out in my backyard smoking cigars, but now I have thousands of fans that are interested in hearing what we have to say, and they're not just listening and hearing what I'm saying, but there's a much more back and forth dialogue. We do that on our show, where we have fans that write in and we can hear what they have to say, and Richard is always nice. He only pulls out the good ones. I always say, hey,
no, he thinks that's not true. They're really mostly they're almost always good ones, and even when they're bad, like there's a guy who gave us he ended up giving us a 5-star review on iTunes, and I love the review because it starts out, "I used to think Frank Mir was a gigantic a-hole." And then, but by the time you get to the end of it, he's like, "I've totally misjudged the guy listening to the podcast." He's like, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was like, I wasn't even hearing a guy talk. I was just going off of, he's going to fight some guy I like, and he's giving him a mean look because they're about to fight or whatever. He's like, he's not really hearing the person behind the persona. And so he's saying, oh yeah, this podcast has totally shown me another side of that. And I think when you're a nuanced individual, it takes long form broadcasting to be able to do that. It's one thing when you're an off-putting type of person and you speak in sound bites, but I think sometimes when you've got depth to you, like Frank has, you need a vehicle where you can really sit and talk at length to get a lot of complex ideas out, to really show people your true depth. For me, I think the coolest thing about it has been seeing how into this Frank is, because he really is truly a 50-50 partnership in what we're doing. And awesome. I have never, and I never really thought about this.
Being nice.
No, it's true. It's true.
Give him a hug, Frank.
We both bring our own set of skills.
Hold on. If I decided not to come to work tonight, the show could go on. If Richard decides not to show up, We're done.
Oh, I don't know about that. One way or another, we would make the show happen. Trust me, with both of us. But you know, I never really thought about this until fairly recently. But and despite doing radio for 15 years, I never had a partner. It's always just been me. Yeah. And I'm an only child, and I probably act like an only child in a lot of ways in my life, you know. And one of the things I always liked about radio was like, it's not like a band where I had to get along with 4 or 5 different dudes. You know, it was just me. And this partnership has really become it's been very seamless. And you know, the one thing that I thought going into it was, I thought, well, you know, it is hard work. And, you know, maybe if you've only been on the interview side, I mean, Frank's been interviewed a million times. And when you just do the interview, you know, you sit down, they ask you the questions, 10 minutes later, you're done. And so I did have the thought when we first started this that, well, you know, he's going to see that, you know, there's a lot of work involved. I mean, it's no different than training, you know, MMA when somebody thinks all you have to do is show up and fight twice a year and you're not taking into account the camp and everything that goes on behind the scenes. But quite contrary to that, I mean, Frank is not only taken to it, but he's trying to figure out how we can do more all the time. And I'll tell you, I wasn't sure. We've made 2 road trips now, just in the last couple of months. We went to EBI 6, where we saw you guys there at the Orpheum Theater. We'll be back, by the way, on July 16th for EBI 7. Cool. And then we just got back this past week from doing the run up to LA for UFC 199 and our press obligations. And I knew before the first road trip that we took that we should do it. I knew why it would be important. I knew we needed to not only promote the show, but get out in front of our listeners and all that. But I thought I might have to convince Frank this is a good idea. You know, I don't know. I wasn't sure how seaworthy he was when it came to road trips, you know, but sure enough, no problem driving back from LA to Vegas in the middle of the night, cramped up in my Prius.
I didn't have to drive. I was not upset.
Yeah, I did the driving. But, you know, we were rolling tape the whole time. We did a podcast the whole way back, which is in our archives at phoneboothfighting.com. And, you know, it's like every step of the way, it's really been it's been affirming, I guess, to me, that partnership when we do stuff like that, and to see that not only did I not have to convince him it was a good idea, but you know, he's coming to me the second trip going, I'm excited, man, this is going to be great. Like, let's do this, let's do that. How can we do more of it? What if we did it? He hit me with an idea the other night that just blew my mind. You want to? We're giving him everything. We'll spill our guts, right? All right. So what we're doing is, So what we're doing is, we're putting together, and we haven't launched it yet. It'll be up for the next couple of weeks. But we're going to do a Fund Anything campaign for. We're adding a whole bunch of enhancements to the show. People want, you know, high quality video components. They want better audio. There's a ton of stuff they want, which is great. I'm glad that there's a demand for it. But we're so new to this and just starting to catch on with sponsors and things like that there's going to be a little bit of a gap before, you know, Madison Avenue's beating down our door. Yeah. So we're going to do a little Fund Anything campaign where you know, our listeners are able to pledge at levels that will get them anything from a commemorative Phone Booth Fighting backer T-shirt to you know, we're going to make like private lunches with us available, things like that we'll do in Vegas and LA. A lot of different things like that we're going to offer. So we were kicking around ideas, right? And, you know, maybe like a private training session. I mean, just a whole bunch of ideas we had. And this guy right here on this back porch goes, what if we took some people camping?
That's right.
I was like, what? I'm like, yeah, you're one of the. I've never been camping before in my life. He's like, yeah. He's like, we could rent a van. We could, you know, put some listeners in a van and we'll drive them out into the woods. And
that's safe.
And I'm like, all of a sudden, this guy's got us doing like the gathering of the Juggalos. You know, like he's got a whole vision. So I guess we're going to be doing that. I guess we're going to be taking Phone Booth Fighting subscribers camping at some point. Camping, so that gives you an idea how this guy's pushing me.
Wow.
Yeah. What does that mean? No.
We'll be able to take showers.
Now, right. One last thing before we go.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, like I was backstage at UFC 199, and I saw DJ back there, and he had nothing but great things to say about both you guys in the show, and he was telling me stories about you and Frank, and I guess his wife and your wife Frank. Do you have any stories that any stories you want?
I always make that joke. I was saying, same like when Richard and I, started teaming up. His girl, Jen, came over, and my wife. And I'm always nervous when I like somebody as a guy. And I'm sure all married men or guys that live with a woman can attest to. You can like somebody as much as you want.
Yeah.
If your significant other doesn't like their significant other, you're not going to be friends. That ship has sailed. You guys are done.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. It's funny. It doesn't really work the opposite way, because there's been times that she's had some friends where I don't maybe like their men. I'm like, I don't want to go. And, 20 minutes later, I'm like, okay, I'll go get in the shower.
It's true.
Okay, babe.
Fortunately, our girls get along real well together.
Yeah, and Demetrius's wife,
Yeah.
Destiny, she was awesome. She hung out with us.
Yeah.
And my wife and all of us. We were down in Cabo, and we really all got to sit down, eat dinner, hang out for a couple of days, and very impressive human being. Both of them.
Yeah.
They've been around it a long
He
time.
loves you, man.
He's had
He
a long
loves you,
career.
Frank.
So
He loves you, Frank.
Yep.
He was saying nothing but great things about you.
Yeah, DJ's a great. By the way, I love the fact, Frank, that Mighty Mouse is getting interviewed by people who are talking to him about us. I like the fact that people are interviewing him about us. So never mind.
He brought
this
it up
whole
like 4
possibly
times.
pound for pound greatest fighter going thing. Yeah, just talk to him about us. We appreciate you doing that. Yeah. But he's been a great guy. In fact, just last week we had him back on the show. We were there in LA. We went to his hotel room and taped an episode with him co-hosting that's in our Phone Booth Fighting archives as well. And man, that is a guy who and I've sang his praises on the air. I mean, obviously his willingness to do stuff with us, how well we get along with him and everything, it should be an example of this. But what a genuine guy. Like, I mean, he really is one of the true good guys in mixed martial arts and inside the UFC, not to mention arguably the best at it. I mean, the guy who probably would have one of the best claims to make for having some kind of an ego, I think is actually one of the most approachable guys, and it's really translated well to our show. He's just fun, man. He's a fun guy to be around, and he gets it. He gets it. I mean, he was doing a thing it was really kind of, it inspired us, like, because Frank and I are always trying to think of, different ways to connect with our listeners and get creative and how do we engage them and everything. Mighty Mouse was doing a thing. He was doing a meetup with his the subscribers to his Twitch channel. Right after he got done taping with us, and it was like a subscriber only meetup. So if you subscribe to his channel, he gave you a secret location of this pizza place, and then he met you there and hung out. It was a pizza party,
That's really awesome.
With a bunch of guys that play video games together and stuff. So he's been a fun component. We've had him on a couple of times, and this thing we just did with him last week was awesome. And he's actually, those have been some of our most popular episodes, the ones where Demetrius Johnson has been. I was just explaining that to Frank before we went on the air, that I've noticed he's got a really big online fan base, and a lot of times people will talk about, well, he's not translating to a lot of pay-per-view buys or whatever. Sometimes that might be the case, but I know at least when he appears on this show, it's good for downloads.
Right. Yeah. Hey, so we want to thank you guys for being on the show. It was a pleasure doing this. So hopefully we could do it again sometime, and we'll see you definitely at EBI 7 for sure.
Yeah.
So we'll get together and do something in person out there. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that'd be cool. So phoneboothfighting.com every Tuesday and Friday now, right?
Yep, twice a week. You can get the shows at phoneboothfighting.com, in iTunes or Stitcher Radio. We're available on all those platforms. You can also follow us on social media. On Twitter, and Snapchat, both, we're Phone Booth Fight, and on Instagram, we're Phone Booth Fighting.
And also, I'm a big podcaster, and honestly, I really enjoyed your show. It's like one of my top 5 shows I download each week.
Thanks.
And and you, Frank, it's been awesome because Josh and I, we kind of grew up, watching your fight. So to have you on the show and speaking with you, it's really an honor, man. It's a surreal experience.
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you. And it's funny being on this side of it now a little bit more. I've gotten to realize now good productions and bad ones.
Yeah.
So now I really appreciate when I get to talk to other individuals that are in this realm that have thought out and really put homework behind what they're talking about. And you guys definitely have substance and questions, and that makes it pleasurable, which actually is only going to hurt the people that suck at this, because then when they talk to me, you'll see real quick when my answers become yes, no.
You give them the Frank Mir face, right? There you go. Did you guys get a clear shot of it? Hold on, move the mic down.
I can't do it.
Oh, you can't give them a good one on demand?
I suck at that.
Oh, okay.
It has to
All right.
be like in
you
the
want
moment.
me to tee you up? Okay, hold on. Let me give you
It's
a
better
good,
than Verdun's
question.
face, right?
Let's see.
Go do that. Help me out.
Yeah. Question for.
Would this make you like my mental fluffer right now?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm the straight man. Okay, so we're at the press conference here. Question for Frank Mir. Frank, how did it feel to win the fight tonight?
Yeah.
There it is. Perfect.
There you go.
That was perfect.
Yeah, and Richard,
There you go,
and thanks for being a sweetheart, man. Because Josh and I met you at Invictus, I believe 16, and
Yeah.
since that day, you've been a gentleman, you've been a good friend of ours, and really appreciate that also.
No, my pleasure, man. I mean, MMA needs more guys like you. I mean, guys that just grind away. And I'll tell you what, fighters appreciate it too. Everybody's going to line up for a John Jones interview or whatever. But I'll tell you what, when you guys, you literally pound the pavement. I saw you, walking around the perimeter of the arena at 199 and hustling and getting your interviews.
You got in.
And I tell you what, something though. Let me tell you, and this is from personal experience. A lot of those fighters who you talk to today that maybe don't have a long line of people trying to interview them, they will remember it when they become stars. They really do.
Yeah.
And I've benefited from that. I've had guys that, and ladies that I had real good relationships with, and it's because they remember, from very early on, you knew your stuff, you did your homework, you gave them the opportunity, and they look at it like that. They look at you guys giving them an opportunity. So you guys are definitely do it right. And anytime we can help you guys out, we're going to do it.
Cool, man.
Well, help us out with Vinnie Paul's food party, man. We could all get
Okay, all right.
go.
You want an invitation? I got it. Okay, all right. You guys, we may have to have you roll in some road cases or something, impersonate roadies. You don't mind or something, right?
I'll do anything, man.
You'll fit right in.
We'll carry the 24 packs.
Dude, we're Mexican,
okay,
man.
got it.
We're Mexican, man. We work for free.
Well, thank you guys.
All right,
guys. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure, man.
All right, guys.